Badlands. What are the Badlands? Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
Good evening. Today is Black Monday, the day the Dow dropped more than 500 points.
Please join me in welcoming George Soros.
There's panic. Everyone's everybody would try to find a bottom.
To stand up and do something, become really engaged in the electoral process in this country.
What we have to confront is a deep, systemic, and structural restructuring of our world. And this will take some time. And the world will look differently after we have gone through this transition process.
For centuries, they've been stuffing their stomachs with human flesh, and they've been stuffing their pockets with money. But they must realize that this bowl of vampires is about to end.
We have an army of digital soldiers.
That this is coming. This is going to be a part of a future where we can take back our power in ways we didn't even think about in the industrial age that are coming in the digital age.
But the common people of these countries in their heart, they can feel what's happening. They can see our struggle for our independence, for our true sovereignty. And they see this connection with their aspirations to be truly independent, which is exacerbated by the fact that in the Western elites there is a strong desire to freeze the current unfair state of things in international affairs.
Well, let me tell you something, brother. When they took a shot at my hero, and they tried to kill the next President of the United States, enough was enough. And I said, let Trumpomania run wild, brother. Let Trumpomania rule again. Let Trumpomania make America great again.
People who don't believe are walking dead. They are asleep. And this is the awakening.
All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Book of Trump. I'm your host, Gordon McCormick. Today is September 8th, 2025. Welcome to the show. So a little bit of a change of agenda, change of plans. I had a guest lined up to come talk about the financial crisis, but they had to actually thought maybe they would be able to come on as of this morning. But then as of this afternoon, they had to, unfortunately, step away. I thought about canceling the show, but given that this week is 9/11, and we did Codex 9/11 last week, I thought it made sense maybe to double back and do a little bit more 9/11 content. So I kind of looked at it from a few different angles and tried to consider what the best topic for this evening would be. Looked into several of the Trump administration officials, people who are just in the zeitgeist right now, names in the zeitgeist. And perhaps we will look at a few of those people like Steve Wickoff, who's a New York real estate developer, just like Trump. But really the name that I ultimately came to, and the person who I think it makes sense to analyze here, is Jules Kroll. So we're going to focus on Jules Kroll tonight. And maybe we'll talk about him again in the future, but Just be patient with me. We're going to do some of this is going to be a live dig. Some of this is going to be stuff that I've pulled together over years of him coming up and different things that I've done. But before we get any further, let's say thank you to a sponsor. And the first tonight is Golka. Is your wealth ready for Trump's next wave? Gold loves a Trump headline, and it's soaring. From the day he first took office, gold prices have climbed, gaining nearly $400 per ounce since his second term began. Why? Gold thrives in uncertainty. It's a time-tested safe haven, immune to government meddling, a shield against inflation, and a proven way to protect your wealth when markets wobble. With Trump's second term heating up, will gold smash new records in 2025? Nobody knows how high it could go, but smart investors aren't waiting to find out. Take control today. You could even qualify for up to a 10% bonus in free silver. Discover an IRS-approved way to diversify your savings with gold and silver, tax and penalty free. Get your free gold and silver kit delivered straight to your door and learn how to safeguard your future. Visit badlandsgold.com to claim your kit and start building a stronger portfolio today. That's badlandsgold.com. Don't miss out. All right. So Jules Kroll, this is actually like a really, really deep rabbit hole and a very rich well of knowledge. I don't know if that is a name that means anything to many of you, but Kroll Associates, as it was called until I believe it was sold in 2003, maybe 2004, was called the CIA of Wall Street. And basically this guy and his firm were like the investigators, really for Wall Street, but also just for governments around the world. We'll get into some of the big major geopolitical stories or just happenings that they were involved with. But the reason they were called that is because Jules Kroll would hire former CIA, former FBI, former intelligence spooks to come work for his firm. So they would have connections, they would have security clearances, and obviously the skill sets, know-how to do investigations and do digging, I guess in a more formal setting than what we do here. Probably to obviously a much higher level with more powerful tools. But what really makes Jules Kroll, I think, stand out to us in this community, and specifically the Badlands, is because more recently, like as I said, he sold his firm many, many years ago, had other companies as well. But most recently, what he is most known for is starting a company called NewsGuard. As I'm sure many of you, you've probably heard that term before, that company before. And let me just pull up this post that I have this is from my current account, my current X account. I had another account that from before I came to Badlands, but it was kicked off of X, I think, and around the Sound of Music thing. Is it the Sound of Freedom movie? There were like bots attacking me, and anyway, it's a story for another time. But let me share my screen. I reposted what I had posted on my old account. This is from November 2023. And Mike Benz was posting about NewsGuard, as you may recall. So Mike Benz back then, this is when Mike Benz was first becoming big. And he reposts Elon Musk November 22nd, 2023. Elon Musk says, in other words, NewsGuard is a propaganda shop that will produce any lies you want if you pay them enough money. And Mike Benz quote posts him and says, hoax for hire. And then he says, to clarify, NewsGuard's biz model is different from the classic hoax for hire disinfo shops like Bellingcat. NewsGuard sells databases full of blacklisted opposition media organizations and brands, and now basically to governments. The ratings are hoaxes, but they blend them into a package. And then I responded to Mike Benz. This was probably a copy paste from a post I had done before, like the one that from my old account. I can't recall. Maybe not. But I say, according to open source financial disclosures, NewsGuard's lead investor is a guy named Jules Kroll. At the time, I did not understand who Jules Kroll was, but I'm sure Mike Binns probably understood who Jules Kroll was, given what I know about Kroll now, who invested $15 million during their first round of funding. I'm sorry, I need to check on the chat and just make sure I'm not doing anything foolish. What's up, guys? All right, let me get back to this. Okay, so he invested $15 million during the first round of funding, about 30% of the company, according to disclosures. Kroll's primary organization listed is called K2 Integrity. According to financial disclosures, K2 Integrity is only invested in one company called Flashpoint. Flashpoint's CEO is Josh Lefkowitz. By his own admission, Josh claims to be an FBI informant who helps hunt quote-unquote domestic terrorist groups with the FBI's senior management team. And this was relevant to Badlands at the time because by 2020, by this time I was working at Badlands, but John, just as I came on board earlier in this year, earlier in 2023, John had received a letter from NewsGuard basically threatening him because of the election integrity coverage that Badlands Media was doing. And I'm sure other companies or other outlets or other individuals who were writing about election integrity and accusing elections of being fake and accusing this stuff of being nonsense were all probably receiving similar letters. But I remember John reading the letter like on DPH, which is why I decided to go dig on this. So here's the images. And it might be easier if I just put this into Miro. Let's do that. Just give me 1 second. Let me transfer these images over. That'll make it a little easier to look at. I probably have already done this, but they're somewhere lost in the mind map, I'm sure. And that's 3. And 4. All right, we'll come over here now, and it's a little easier to look at it over here. Okay. Yeah, I've definitely done this at some point. They're somewhere in this mind map. Okay, so this first, let me make my screen a little bigger. So this first screenshot, this is from Crunchbase, which is like a financial disclosure website, you know, that publicly available information about companies, corporations, their financial disclosures. There's a paid version of it, but I think if you go there now, like all of it requires a subscription. But back in 2023, you could go and you could look at the basic information for companies. You could look at who their, the number of investors they have. You could look at the number of lead investors. You could click on this. These are hyperlinked, and then it would give you a list of the actual investors. Or at least it would give you the list of the lead investors. It would tell you when the round, like the seed rounds came in. It would tell you when the funding rounds happened, how much money each person was giving. I mean, really, really great tool. I would have done more screenshots of it, but you can only put 4 screenshots in a single X post. So I just picked the 4 most informative screen grabs. And so here's NewsGuard's financial disclosure from Crunchbase. It shows that they were their seed round of funding was on March 6th, 2018, which aligns with what all the stuff Mike Binns has been digging on and doing his shows on, talking about the National Endowment for Democracy and the blob, as he calls it, their efforts to mobilize this information or disinformation weaponization campaign to basically accuse everyone of lying who said bad things about the federal government, elections and whatnot. And so one lead investor, 18 investors total, and Jules Kroll would be the lead investor. Well, K2 Integrity would be the lead investor. Or I'm sorry. Jules Kroll was the lead investor, not K2 Integrity. So then you could click, all of these names were all hyperlinked. So you could click on the companies, you could click on the names, you click on Jules Kroll, and then his profile comes up. This is his profile page from Crunchbase. There's his picture. And it says number of portfolio companies, 1, number of current board and advisory roles, 3, primary job title, co-founder, primary organization, K2 Integrity. Because remember, this is 2023. And so his main company, Kroll Associates, which is the one that was called the CIA of Wall Street, he sold that 20 plus years ago, 20 years before I would have done this dig. Based out of New York, K2 Integrity, and it says investor type, individual angel. Jules Kroll is the chairman and CEO of Kroll Bond Rating Agency Incorporated and the acknowledged pioneer of the modern investigations, intelligence, and corporate security industry. In 1972, he established Kroll Associates Incorporated, the prototype of a professional services firm dedicated to mitigating risk. His firm, which he sold to Marsh & McLennan, ... And we'll get more into the history of Kroll Associates here in a bit. So the next screenshot, I then went and looked at K2 Integrity. K2 Integrity, according to Crunchbase, and maybe Crunchbase has an incomplete data set, but from browsing around their website at the time, it looked like everything was pretty up to date. So it's possible that it doesn't have everything, but it seemed like it did. K2 Integrity at the time when I took these screenshots in late 2023 had made only two investments. Both of those were in a company called Flashpoint. And so the first of those investments occurred on 2015. They weren't considered the lead investor, but I do believe they had I want to say it was 30. I think I said in that post it was 30%. Let me verify that. Yeah, 30%. So 30% of the company was owned by K2 Integrity. And then the second round of funding was a year later. So the first round of funding was April 2015. The second round of funding was July 2016. And both times went into Flashpoint. And I believe it was millions of dollars. I'd have to go back and double check, but if I recall correctly, it was millions of dollars. All right, and then the fourth screenshot that I show is from I went to Flashpoint's website, and I'll pull that up here in a second just so we can kind of round it out. But this is Josh Lefkowitz, CEO, Flashpoint. Josh Lefkowitz is the CEO of Flashpoint and executes the company's strategic vision to illuminate the deep and dark web and deliver unparalleled insights to customers. He has worked extensively with federal, state, and local authorities to track and analyze terrorist groups. And I'm pretty sure, according to Josh Lefkowitz, Badlands Media would be considered at least adjacent to a terrorist group because we accuse elections of being fake and gay. Lefkowitz also served as a consultant to the FBI's senior management team and worked for a top-tier global investment bank where he gained experience with Fortune 500 companies and ultra-high net worth individuals. And I have to guess that those connections have something to do with Jules Kroll. And as we learn more about Jules Kroll, I think you'll understand, Josh Lefkowitz maybe a little better. And I don't know that much about Josh Lefkowitz other than just what is written here, but let's look real quick at Flashpoint's website, and then we'll back up and go to the beginning of Jules Kroll. The reason I'm starting here is just to kind of give y'all a more direct connection of how Jules Kroll is not just connected to 9/11 and other Robert Maxwell and other things that we've already talked about on the show, but he's actually connected directly to Badlands because of NewsGuard. And NewsGuard has been all over the place in terms of the news. All right, so here is Flashpoint's website. You can see this is definitely them because it's the same logo. It's that little flame, the same thing you saw on Crunchbase. And it says there here on the main page, the best data for the best intelligence. It says the Flashpoint difference. And then you can see right here. Here is a Department of Defense logo. Here's a Kaiser Permanent. I guess that's a company. Target, Wells Fargo, Microsoft. I assume these are all clients. It says the Flashpoint difference with access to over 3.6 petabytes of data from the internet's open and difficult to reach spaces. We combine human-powered data collection and intelligence with intuitive technology to help the world's leading organizations protect people, places, and assets. And just like to simplify what they're saying there, because that's just a bunch of, corporate jargon. Come back here. Remember what Mike Ben said. To clarify, NewsGuard's business model is different from the classic hoax for hire disinfo shops like Bellingcat. NewsGuard sells databases full of blacklisted opposition media organizations to brands and now basically to governments. Meaning they package all this information together. Here are the group of individuals, of companies, of organizations you should be afraid of. You should watch out for. Google. Or maybe maybe Google doesn't need their input, but Microsoft, Target, Wells Fargo. So like they'll go to the bank and say, "Hey, Wells Fargo, here's a list of individuals who are saying really shady stuff online. You should probably send them a message and let them know that their ability to bank with you might be in jeopardy if they don't change their tune." I mean, we saw it happen to several people who were saying the wrong thing. Basically, Josh Lefkowitz is the guy who is because Jules Kroll is not the one actually doing the research these days. It would be a guy like Josh Lefkowitz. Says how teams leverage Flashpoint, identify and quickly remediate cyber threats, vulnerability, and physical security risks with superior data, human expertise, and automated analysis. If you come up to services, they list managed intelligence and professional services. There's two different verticals, and it all has to do with threat monitoring, requests for information, event monitoring, proactive acquisitions, person of interest, executive investigations. And then they have all sorts of libraries and glossaries, and let's see who their partners are under resources. Oh, become a partner. So here are their partners. Their partners are, I don't recognize many of these companies that we're scrolling across the page. But I wanted to, what I was actually looking for was that's interesting. So they changed they appear to have changed their website, because obviously you could go before and you could look at who was part of their team. And that's where I got the Josh Lefkowitz. Let me see, about us. Let me see if that'll do it. Here we go. Okay. It says meet Flashpoint leadership. You have Josh Lefkowitz. We've already met him. Jim de Blasio, Patrick Gardner, Tom Hoffman, Lisa Ayadanza, David Lemon, and Joe Sawyer. Let's see. Jim de Blasio, Chief Financial Officer, says he's the CFO at Flashpoint. He enhances shareholder value, drives unsustainable growth, over 40 years of experience, proven track record in scaling financial operations, etc. Okay. Chief Product and Engineering Officer is Patrick Gardner. Wealth of experience building and deploying technology to protect millions of customers. Prior to Flashpoint, he served as CTO at Time by Ping and held significant engineering and executive roles at Symantec, where he founded the XDR Advanced Threat Protection product line and led the transformation of their largest SaaS business. Okay. Chief Intelligence Officer, this might be interesting, Tom Hoffman, responsible for the company's overall intelligence strategy, including the norms, value systems, processes, and culture of the company's world-class analyst team. In addition, Tom leads Flashpoint's customer success organization, ensuring exceptional service and support for our 750 elite customers. Prior to joining Flashpoint, Tom led cyber threat intelligence operations at PNC. Okay, PNC, I'm pretty sure that's one of the big four. Let's just verify that. PNC. No, it's the bank. So the bank. So it's the bank PNC. Okay. Managed CTI collections at Booz Allen and served as an information warfare officer for the U.S. Navy. Okay, so he comes from so he's a spook. He comes from the intelligence world, from the military, but there are plenty of black hats that come out of military intelligence too. We don't need to look at these other three. I just wanted to see if anything jumped out in terms of their backgrounds. No, it's really just Josh Lefkowitz who shills the fact that he's FBI informant or former FBI. And look, he's actually revamped his look at this. I got to screen cap this. You can now look at the before and after. So it's like during the Biden administration, when everyone was living like under the fear of like the fear porn of misinformation and disinformation, he bragged about, consulting to the FBI senior management and worked for top tier global investment bank. But I guess, being a consultant for the FBI senior management, now that the FBI senior management of 2023 are all being investigated for malfeasance, probably not bragging about that anymore. And so now you are, he has a much more boilerplate bio. Interesting. So anyway, those are the guys, at least some of the guys who have come after Badlands. Let's get back to Jules Kroll. So before we get into Jules Kroll, I did find a video, like an interview of him, and it must be relatively recent. This is with the podcast called Coercive Capital, or maybe no, the podcast is called Illicit Edge, and the title of this is The Investigator. And Jules Kroll is looking pretty old here, so this must be relatively recent, March 2025. So we'll just listen to a few minutes of this and kind of get a sense of this guy.
And if you look at the number of private investigators who've come through the doors of Kroll, you've trained so many. I wanted to start the conversation by going back to when you started your work in the private investigation field around 1972. Why did you start the firm? Why did you get into the private investigative world in the first place?
Well, we didn't start as investigators. I had been an assistant DA in Manhattan, and we had a small, struggling family printing business, which we ended up disposing of. But that gave me the idea for a consulting business, not an investigations business, which focused for several years on how to make the purchasing or the procurement process more honest, because there was quite a bit of commercial bribery. So I would say for the first 4 or 5 years, that's primarily what we did, was consulting on how to improve and how to provide special audits. We didn't call ourselves investigators until the early 80s, after 7-8 years in business.
That's fascinating. I also think it's interesting that your own experience with dealing with corruption and what your father, as I was reading, what your father went through in terms of trying to protect his own business from corruption was the impetus behind your work. And I know that for a period of time you were interested in going into public service, and you ran a campaign. How did that influence where you ended up going?
Well, it was a profound influence because as a kid, I was raised in Queens. I actually ran in an insurgent campaign against the established Democratic machine, which was corrupt from top to bottom. It was an anti-corruption campaign circa 1971. And it was very clear that it was a corrupt system. And in fact, during the period of the 70s and early 80s, 26 of the public officials in Queens ended up going to jail on various forms of corruption or bribery cases, including the fellow who was the organization's candidate who I ran against and lost to. He went away subsequently on federal charges, felony charges, twice. But he was only one of 26 that was caught up in the corruption of the day. So that experience had a profound effect on my thinking and my goals and on the creation of the business.
So over the years, you've had a lot of high-profile cases and a lot of cases that were very much under the radar. But one thing that struck me about the kinds of work that you've taken on is that you've been going after kleptocrats before the term kleptocrat was even in use. When we think about Saddam Hussein, tracking his stolen assets, Ferdinand Marcos, Haiti's baby Doc Duvalier, and others. I'm curious about how you think about kleptocrats today. We talk about Putin as a kleptocrat. We talk about other current leaders in authoritarian regimes as driving kleptocracies. Has anything really changed?
No. We ended up doing this kind of work originally as part of the business in 1985 when we did a pro bono assignment for the U.S. Congress. The late Congressman Stephen Solars, who's a friend, called me and said, I've been railing against Ferdinand Marcos for years with all the money, U.S. money he steals for himself and his family and his cronies. And there's been some excellent work done by the Sacramento, on the Sacramento Bee, by some expats from the Philippines. And he said, I can't evaluate it. It looks real. Will you help me evaluate it? And will you help me perfect the investigation? Because I've never done an investigation before. And he said, I also can't pay you. So that was the beginning. And it turned out that the expats had done really good work. Our work was really in support of their original work. And so I was very proud to help. And that became the first case of kleptocracy that we were involved in. And it was the first of maybe 60, at this point it's 65, 66 of those between my original business and my current business.
So I'm curious to ask you, at this stage, having worked on thousands of cases across public officials, private corporations, and others, who's better at hiding wealth? Rogue nations, oligarchs, Fortune 500 executives? And is there a distinction in terms of how you think about asset recovery?
There are many permutations of stealing in that setting, depending on the circumstances of a country and the circumstances of the times. You know, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act was only went into law in the late 70s, 78 or 79, but it really came out of a circumstance involving Lockheed in Japan, and they were paying off to get contracts in Japan, and that only came out as indirectly the work that was done in the campaign finance area during the Nixon period. So it first came to formal public attention during that time. And each of these circumstances is somewhat different. So for example, the work we did with Marcos, there had been outstanding work that had already been done by these Filipino expats. But we put lawyers on it, we put forensic accountants on it, and of course we had the power of the congressional subpoena at that point. When we did the work in Haiti, going after baby Doc, who was the son of the prior ruler of Haiti. That was just a crude taking. It wasn't very sophisticated. You know, Baby Doc would go into the treasury of Haiti, and it would write a check, and this was literally the case: $4 million to buy an apartment at Trump Tower. This was back in the late 80s, so it was very crude, very unsophisticated. When you go to the period in the early 90s, we had worked for the Yeltsin.
Of course, he has to say buying an apartment at Trump Tower. All right, I want to. I was going to stop right there, but I want to listen to what he says right here because he's about to talk about working for the Russians in the 90s, working for Yeltsin right after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So we're going to listen to what he says here, and then we'll cap it there.
Regime, and we were hired to track the money that the KGB had taken out of the country and used offshore, and that was much more sophisticated with cutouts and cover stories, and something you can imagine was done on a reasonably sophisticated basis. The problem was when we turned the information over to members of the Yeltsin regime, that money didn't always make it back to the state. When you had the takeover of many assets in Russia, some of the early oligarchs were people who knew how to get a hold of those assets, and many of them became billionaires as a result of it. In the case of Fujimori, which was another case we had done, who had been the president of Peru, we had a contract from the UN. And
okay, so I think we can cap it there. And for those joining us just now, I see some people in the chat asking. The topic for tonight is Jules Kroll, and this guy is connected to everything that we talk about. As I just detailed, he is the lead investor. He's the creator of NewsGuard, and the lead in a company he more recently created over the past few years, K2 Integrity. I think it was incorporated in 2012. Is the lead investor in a company called Flashpoint, which was basically going out and identifying social media influencers who were talking about COVID, talking about election integrity. They NewsGuard sent John a letter threatening him. No doubt Flashpoint was the one who pointed them out to NewsGuard, I would assume. And so this is the guy, Jules Kroll. Now, Kroll's big claim to fame, and the reason why I wanted to talk about him is because he was hired in 1993 after the World Trade Center was bombed. He was brought in to streamline the security and fix the security situation at the World Trade Center. Kroll Associates was. That's the big claim to fame here. He also happened to be one of the last people to see Robert Maxwell alive in 1991. So this guy has kind of been all over the place, but when it comes to the Book of Trump, I mean, considering we're only on chapter 30, he has had his fingerprints on pretty much almost every subject. You heard him just talking about Yeltsin. He was working for Putin in the early days. I don't think he has a favorable view of Putin these days, but basically in 1993, he was hired by Yeltsin to go after the KGB guys who had taken, $6 to $8 billion out of Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union. But ironically, I don't think he went after the Ukrainian organized crime syndicates that were laundering that money to Israel. So anyway, so let's back up and let's look at let's just do a quick dive into his history, and then we'll get up to speed as quickly as we can so we can talk about 9/11 and Robert Maxwell and Russia, because those are three pretty big subjects that he just happens to be connected to. Let me pull my notes up. Okay. So Jules Kroll, his background, his history, he starts as in 1968, he worked for RFK Sr., this would be RFK Jr.'s father, the original RFK, his presidential campaign in Queens before becoming an assistant district attorney in Manhattan. When his father fell ill, he had to take a leave of absence from being a prosecutor to go run the family business. And that's when he was talking about the printing, like I think he describes it as like a pathetic printing shop that his dad ran that, didn't make any money. And as he describes in this other article, The Secret Keeper, this is from October of 2009. This is all about Jules Kroll. He says, according to Kroll, it was the 1950s, and what Kroll mainly remembers from watching his old man go over the books at the kitchen table on Sundays are the humiliations that his father suffered at the hands of purchasing agents, many of whom required gifts, kickbacks before they would give him work. Quote, it was pretty dispiriting, he says. It makes me pretty angry. Later, when his father fell ill, Kroll, by then a young assistant district attorney in Manhattan, had to come home and run the business. A 3-month leave of absence turned into 3 claustrophobic years. But the experience gave Kroll an idea. He made the rounds of companies that had a lot of printing done. He could save them money. He said he knew where the graft was in their printing jobs, the bribes and the waste and overpayments. He wasn't asking for a fee, just a percentage of whatever he saved them. The parent company of Marvel Comics was the first to agree, and Kroll was soon saving the company so much that it tore up the percentage deal, which might have made Kroll rich and put him on a retainer. So just to reiterate that, he went around New York, going to the companies that were printing a lot of paper, and Marvel Comics happened to be one of the big ones, and so he helped them figure out where they were wasting money, where they were being taken advantage of by the print shops, and because he used to run a print shop, and he was so successful with Marvel that Marvel said, "Yeah, we're not going to give you a percentage. Like, we're just going to put you on retainer, and you're going to work for us permanently moving forward." Let's see. He says, Spider-Man, the Hulk, I really owe my business to those superheroes. He said Kroll's business launched in 1972 as J. Kroll Associates, eventually became Kroll Inc., the world's preeminent detective agency with 3,000 employees, countless subcontractors, and offices in 60 cities in more than 35 countries. According to the history professor who introduced Kroll that day, Kroll Inc. specializes in, quote, pursuing crime, particularly financial crime, across international borders. And so Kroll told stories about recovering the wealth plundered by dictators, among them Ferdinand Marcos, Saddam Hussein, Jean-Claude Baby Doc Duvalier. Baby Doc, Kroll said, was not the sharpest nail in the box. He had looted the Haitian treasury by writing big checks. Apartment in Trump Tower. Kroll made a show of laborious penmanship. Trump Tower. Even we could figure that one out. So see, it's like these people, they all think Trump is the worst person on earth, and the fact that some corrupt dictator from Haiti, was embezzling money from the Haitian treasury, and he bought an apartment in Trump Tower. Suddenly, that makes Donald Trump corrupt, I guess. Yeah, I mean, these people are sick, obviously. So let's see. Down here it says, a student from Germany asked how Kroll had the authority to conduct investigations. Wasn't that role reserved for police? This is a good question. No, was the short answer. Kroll needed a license to operate. That was all. Kroll then told a story about an American telecommunications company that was being extorted by Turkish hackers in Germany. The FBI was not ready to get involved, so the company brought in Kroll. Kroll sent an operative into the hackers' midst, quickly gathering enough evidence to interest the FBI. This is how I make my living, Kroll said. The FBI is busy. So what he's describing here, just so we're clear, is he's describing a private investigation organization. I mean, you could make arguments that that's kind of what we do at Badlands here. Is like we do research, and then we do podcasts where we present the research, as we're doing right now. And he worked once upon a time. He worked for RFK Sr. purportedly, and he worked as a DA in Manhattan. And who knows, maybe he started out his career earnestly. I mean, he describes how his father's business was being taken advantage of by grifters and by graft schemes. And that animated him and inspired him to develop this consulting business. So who knows? Maybe he did start out noble, like altruism, whatever. But it says here that actually that's not how Kroll made his living. Talking about the FBI, says that's not how Kroll made his living, or at least not most of it. Breaking up extortion rings, nailing dictators. That's the Marvel Comics version of Jules Kroll's career. And this is the important part. Kroll really made his living and his name on Wall Street. He owed his success not to Spider-Man, but to Goldman Sachs and Skadden Arps, and a long list of corporations, law firms, investment banks, management consultants, hedge funds, and brokerage houses. Kroll likes to say, quote, sunlight is a wonderful antiseptic, end quote. Well, that's a line that we use, right? But he and his company have been more highly valued for keeping things in the dark than for the occasional client-approved expose. They are the keepers of innumerable, embarrassing, probably career-destroying, possibly corporation-destroying secrets. Jules Kroll may pose credibly as a crusader for truth and justice, but his life has been more interesting than that. Kroll is widely credited with having created an industry where there was none. Call it corporate intelligence. There were, of course, plenty of detective agencies and security companies around when he started, but successful private investigators in the United States, Pinkerton, Wackenhut, have tended to expand into guard and alarm operations. Pinkerton were, those are the guys who would guard the gold that was being transported across the old West. You put the gold in like an armored carriage with horses, and then you'd hire the Pinkertons, and the Pinkertons would, be armed guards to take it across the desert. And then the bandits would come and try to hijack the stagecoach, right? Think like the Wells Fargo logo. Kroll took his business in another direction, upward into finance and strategic planning. He offered an ever-widening range of services: forensic accounting, crisis management, competitor analysis, tooled for a globalized business world in which industrial espionage, counterfeiting, computer fraud, identity fraud, and sophisticated financial crimes have flourished. Quote, he was legitimizing private detective work at a different level. Joe Rossetti, who was the vice chairman of Kroll until 2001, said. Rossetti was the security director at IBM when Kroll recruited him in the early 80s. In 2004, Kroll sold his company to Marsh & McLennan, an insurance conglomerate, for nearly $2 billion in cash. Kroll, already a wealthy man, pocketed around $170 million. His ownership stake, once 100%, was diluted after he took the company public in 1997. And he stayed on to run Kroll Inc. as a Marsh subsidiary. He retired in July 2008, constrained by a one-year non-compete agreement with Marsh from conducting any Kroll-type business, but now unconstrained by the client interest and discretion that had always restricted his role in public debates. Kroll began to speak in lectures and interviews about failures of corporate governance and the deep flaws of standard investment models. He knows an unusual amount about what laid the financial industry low last year. For traumatized investors betrayed by the credit risk rating agencies, what is needed, he says, is a whole new risk model. And so this article was published in October 2009. And this is interesting because what we originally were going to do tonight was the 2008 financial crisis. And we're still going to do that. We just couldn't do it tonight. So that's exactly what he's talking about. He's talking about how says he knows an unusual amount about what laid the financial industry low last year. Quote unquote, risk mitigation is one of Kroll's preferred descriptions of his line of work. Like other catchphrases that he has employed through the years, professional services, management consultant, and helps rub off the patina of seediness attached to the term private investigator, something that has been the bane of his branding efforts since the day he started. And in the integrity business, yet another way he describes his field, brand is everything. See, again, that's interesting because I feel like that's how John describes what we do. Like, we're kind of in the integrity business. It's like your credibility is kind of everything. And without your credibility, you really have nothing if you're going to, do research and present it in the format that we do. Plan A was politics. Kroll's college classmates all seemed to foresee a career in public service for him. J.O. Light, now the dean of the Harvard Business School, told me that he thought Julie, as he was known, might end up as governor of New York. Others thought first Jewish president. Kroll was outgoing, popular. He was elected vice president of the fraternity council. He had a photographic memory for faces and names. He fought successfully to repeal fraternity rules restricting membership to white Christians. He went to law school at Georgetown and worked for Senator Robert F. Kennedy. In 1968, he helped coordinate Kennedy's presidential campaign in Queens. In 1971, at 29, Kroll ran for city council. He was a reform Democrat campaigning on an anti-corruption platform and got trashed by the Democrat Party machine candidate. Now, what's interesting about this, I don't have the actuals to prove this, but that year is interesting. 1971. 1971 is the year that the neoconservative movement began. And the neoconservative movement, as we talked about several weeks ago when Chris Paul came on, was founded in New York City, in Queens, by Jewish intellectuals, the children of people who were beholden, who were from Eastern Europe and were beholden to Leon Trotsky, who was kicked out of the Soviet Union by Stalin in the early 1930s, and then lived out his days in Mexico, or I guess he was kicked out maybe in the late 1920s. Lived out his days in Mexico, and his disciples went on to have offspring in New York City, who would then go on to grow up as Democrats, but they would become very disillusioned with the Democrat Party because Leon Trotsky, as we discussed in that episode, was pro-war. He was pro-revolution. He basically said we need to be having revolution constantly everywhere at all times in order to, the engine of revolution is what drives progress and what drives, is what makes the whole thing work, communism basically. And Stalin didn't agree with him on that. Stalin didn't want a worldwide revolution. And because the Democrat Party in the 60s became very anti-war, that was their whole platform, really starting with Kennedy, with JFK. These people became very disillusioned with the Democrat Party, and so they became reformed Democrats, and then switched parties and went to become Republicans. Well, we're not the old Republicans. We're the new Republicans. We're pro-war Democrats. We're pro-war Republicans. We're neocons. So I don't know if this guy's a neocon or not. That's a long way of saying I don't know if this guy's a neocon or not, but something tells me if he was the one that they hired to go after KGB agents and go after Saddam Hussein, he probably was a neocon. He fits the bill, at least on paper. I just want to see if there's anything else in here that is notable for, I'm sure there's plenty of notable stuff in here, but okay. So the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act of 1977. Let's talk about that real quick. Well, before we get there, this is an interesting little note. He says, overseas operations eventually accounted for a major part of Kroll's business. I asked Helsby if Kroll had stringers in every country on earth. Quote, we currently don't have a guy in Antarctica, he said. If you know anybody good, let me know. So these guys, again, like when I say that they are known as the CIA of Wall Street, it's because they literally hired people out of the intelligence community to come work for them in the private sector. So these are all just like former spooks. Okay, and then it talks about the Italian mafia hiring Kroll to do audits for them. Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk about the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act of 1977, because this is going to connect us to President Trump as well. All right. So the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act of 1977 is a federal law that prohibits U.S. citizens and entities from bribing foreign officials, government officials, to benefit their business interests. The anti-bribery provisions of the FCPA have applied to all U.S. persons and certain foreign issuers of securities. And then it says, following amendments made in 1998, the act also applies to foreign firms and persons who either directly or through intermediaries help facilitate or carry out corrupt payments in U.S. territories. So as I was reading and preparing for the show, my understanding is that, and I think Jules Kroll says this himself, he said it in that interview, the passage of this law in 1977 really like supercharged his business, because he went from just being like an auditor of like domestic situations, like going around to like Marvel Comics and being like, hey, let me help you figure out where you're getting screwed and like with your from your printer, to once this got passed, he could then now go work for foreign governments who could say, all right, either, foreign governments or maybe entities that recognize that when U.S. citizens or U.S. Like businessmen are bribing foreign governments to benefit them, like those kind of situations, which is a very gray area because the jurisdiction becomes very gray. Like as he explained before, can the FBI go investigate something that's happening in Germany just because a U.S. citizen is involved? Sometimes yes, sometimes no, but their priority isn't necessarily going to be to go looking there unless there's a lot of smoke. So this is where he made his bread and butter, is the passage of this law. So that brings us to real quick side quest. Here's February 10th, 2025. President Trump halts enforcement of U.S. law banning bribery of foreign officials. Okay, so President directs DOJ to pause prosecutions under Foreign Corrupt Practices Act and issues pardon to Rod Blagojevich. God, his name always trips me up, but we know who we're talking about. We're talking about the guy with the messy hair, the guy with the hair like mine, the Chicago mayor, right? And it says Donald Trump signed an executive order on Monday directing the U.S. Justice Department to halt prosecuting Americans accused of bribing foreign government officials to win business. The order instructs the U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi to pause prosecutions under the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act of 1977 until she issues revised enforcement guidance that promotes American competitiveness. Quote, future FCPA investigations and enforcement actions will be governed by this new guidance and must be approved by the Attorney General, the document said. According to the White House, the law puts U.S. firms at a disadvantage to foreign competitors because they cannot engage in practices that are, quote, common among international competitors, creating an uneven playing field. Quote, American national security depends on America and its companies gaining strategic commercial advantages around the world, and President Trump is stopping excessive, unpredictable FCPA enforcement that makes American companies less competitive. And you can imagine, as they were saying in this other article, they're the keeper of secrets. It's like that's really what they do. They're not this noble superhero as is being described in this article. They're really more of like the keeper of secrets, where they learn things about people, and it's like, all right, so now we know all your secrets. If you don't want us to take all this information and turn it over to the proper authorities, maybe we should work together. I mean, those kind of opportunities could be very, very common, I would imagine. Not to mention, when it comes from an enforcement standpoint, you could become very subjective as to who you go after. Like maybe you're only going after certain companies, with certain political views, or maybe you're targeting a company because they are a direct competitor to somebody who you have a relationship with, like a friend or a family member or whatever. So that's why I think Trump probably put a pause on this and said, we're going to pause these prosecutions until we can issue better guidance. And again, that's how I think a guy like Jules Kroll is able to like walk around and laud himself as like this force of good in the world, because he is ostensibly going after Saddam Hussein's, hidden money. Like that's another one of his big claims to fame. But it just seems like that is not necessarily actually what he's doing. Those are like PR puff pieces to legitimize a business that is otherwise actually engaging in a lot of really seedy behavior, because if he's the CIA of Wall Street, basically what they're saying is that he goes around and he investigates the companies on Wall Street that are engaging in quote unquote malfeasance. Well, isn't that what most of Wall Street is doing? And yet arbitrarily certain entities at certain points get snagged and they end up getting prosecuted. Well, why is that? Why is it that it seems so subjective? And that is just another layer of the corruption, I think. Again, a little bit of speculation there. But let's go to Robert Maxwell, because before we go to 9/11, obviously Robert Maxwell is going to be relevant. But before we do, let's go ahead. Let's go ahead and hit another ad read. And our next ad read is MyPillow. Sorry, let me just make sure there we go. All right. A large retail store just canceled a huge order, leaving MyPillow with a ton of extra MyPillows. But you know what? That's their loss and your gain. MyPillow is offering the classic collection for wholesale prices, only $19.98 for a standard MyPillow, but it gets even better. For a limited time, they're going to offer their entire classic collection at wholesale prices. Get queen size MyPillows for just $24.98. Upgrade to king size for only $29.98. Get the body pillows for $39.98 and multi-use MyPillows for only $12.98. Go to mypillow.com and use promo code Badlands, or call 1-800-795-5154, or take advantage of wholesale pricing and receive $100 in free digital gifts when your order is $75 or more. That's right. Get the standard MyPillow for only $19.98. Go to mypillow.com or call 1-800-795-5154 and use promo code Badlands to get the standard MyPillow for only $19.98. All right. So where do we want to go? We wanted to go to this. All right, so what you're looking at, this is that book that I've mentioned before. And this is Robert Maxwell, Israel's Super Spy, The Life and Murder of a Media Mogul by Gordon Thomas and Martin Dillon. Published in, I believe it was published in 2001, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe verify that. It says it was uploaded in 2021, but that's not the actual publish. Because the timing does make sense, does matter here. Yes, 2002. Which makes sense because I'm pretty sure they do talk about Kroll and 9/11 in this book, if I'm not mistaken. Let me see if I can find that. I don't think they call it 9/11. They call it September 11. Last one I'm going to try before we give up. Maybe not. All right, that's all right. Okay, so we will go to here. Okay. So we're just going to read a little bit excerpt from this because this is pretty interesting. Keeping in mind that Robert Maxwell died on, I want to say it was November 5th. So Robert Maxwell died on November 5th, 1991. That's what you got to keep in mind. All right, so this is chapter 17 from this book. It's like page 293, or I'm sorry, 239. On Monday, the 28th of October, 1991, one of those warm afternoons when summer seems to revisit New York, the world's foremost private detective walked into the lobby of the Helmsley Palace Hotel. Jules Kroll was over 6 feet tall and dressed in an expensive expensively tailored suit, his hallmark, and his hair was graying at the temples, making him look like a Wall Street broker rather than a feared investigator. An associate manager whose nightly rate was less than Kroll charged for an hour's work escorted him to the penthouse suite. Maxwell was waiting at the door, smiling nervously. He gripped Kroll's hand and thanked him profusely for having agreed to the meeting. No problem, Kroll's voice was measured, his eyes strayed into the spacious lounge. A woman sat there looking preoccupied. Kroll sensed Maxwell did not want her to be any part of the reason they were meeting. He was used to that. Everybody had his reason. It was partly why he had existed. He didn't give the woman a second thought. Maxwell suggested they could talk on the roof. No problem, Kroll repeated. He followed Maxwell up to the stairs to what passed for a roof garden. For a moment, they stood and admired the view. Away to one side were the twin towers of the World Trade Center. There you go. Behind him, a distance, planes were on their final approach to LaGuardia and Kennedy. Below, Central Park wore its autumn coat of bright hues. Remember, at this point in 1991, Kroll's was not connected to the World Trade Center. That didn't come until for 2 years later. Kroll was in no hurry. At the age of 50, he had learned the importance of waiting. He had learned that in all those years he had spent investigating white-collar criminals and dealing with, among much else, kidnappers. He had synthesized his company's work as being able to anticipate the risks and mitigate them, respond immediately to a crisis, acquire the information and intelligence necessary to make the most informed and strategic decisions. His sources and methods were his alone to know. He worked within the they may be missing. It sucks. They're missing a page here. Huh. Well, hold on one second. Let me see because that page seems like it's going to be pretty significant. I know I've read that page before. Find page 240 of Gordon Thomas's Israel Super Spy book. Let's see if ChatGPT can track this down. If not, we'll just proceed without it. Okay, so it says the next day, Robert Maxwell flew back to London and met with John Fetley, who was his employer, in good humor. Fetley, a wisecracking Cockney, was relieved. There had been times when Maxwell had stumbled off an aircraft, snapping at anyone who caught his eye. There were several reasons for Maxwell's relaxed manner. Before leaving New York, his lawyers had said all the writs in the Hirsch case had been served. There had been no worrying calls from Kevin. Kroll had begun his inquiries. Fetley had brought no urgent message from Maxwell on the phone, his son, as soon as he had cleared customs. And then down here, so what happens? I'll summarize what ends up happening. What ends up happening is that Robert Maxwell is hiring Kroll to investigate his enemies. He has become at this point in his life hyper paranoid. He's over leveraged. He's basically been embezzling money from pension funds, robbing Peter to pay Paul kind of thing. And it's all caught up to him. And he thinks in his head that Mossad has his back. That's at least how it's presented. But he thinks that he has like enemies out there that are coming for him. And so he is hiring Kroll to, investigate people on his behalf or ask around on his behalf, to figure out, who has an interest in Robert Maxwell's assets, who's coming after Robert Maxwell's kingdom, so to speak. From what I gathered, from what I've seen Kroll say about Maxwell, it seems like Kroll took the meeting out of a professional courtesy, but really had no interest in helping Maxwell, because I think Kroll understood what Maxwell was doing. As has been explained, Kroll's whole line of work was investigating people's financial situation. And so it's probably not a stretch to realize that Kroll could probably pick up on the fact that the banks were all like demanding the payments from from Maxwell that weren't being made. And Maxwell was over leveraged. And yeah, so he didn't end up really doing anything for Maxwell. But let me see. Yes, find the raw text of the book online. We'll see if there's a different one that's not the archive one, because I do want to read that that interaction. There's Internet Archive, and then there's platform. Okay, let's see if this one has it. Yeah, here we go. Boom, found it. Look at that. ChatGPT, you actually did your job. I'm proud of you. Proud of you, ChatGPT, for not being a retarded AI. Oh, okay. We're gonna have to watch an ad real quick if we want to look at page 240. So bear with me for a second. Okay, skip the ad. And we were on page 240. There it is. Oh, this is the exact same scan. Man, that is disappointing. Somebody removed that. Somebody removed that that page from the online scan. Very, very strange. Okay, so we can jump ahead to where I think they talk about Kroll again. Okay, so it said, here's page 260. It says, in New York, where it was still late evening on Friday, Jules Kroll was ending his first week as Maxwell's highly paid investigator. What progress he had made so far, he would share with no outsider. Hours before, one of the Yahalomin, a two-man team, had made their way into the marina. They're talking about the Mossad agents. I believe the assassins or either the assassins or maybe like the team that are scouting Maxwell. Had made their way into the marina at Funchal Harbor in Madeira. Having cleared customs and immigration, they had taken a taxi to the town's most elegant accommodation, Reed's Palace Hotel, overlooking the bay and the calm Atlantic beyond, some 260 miles to the south in the port of Las Palmas in Gran Canaria. The Keydon waited. Keydon are Mossad field officers. To any onlooker, they were just four more fishermen. Dawn was breaking over the sea on the second day of November. Maxwell clambered up to the upper sun deck. Around his neck slung a powerful pair of Zeiss binoculars. So now it's just describing him going on the Lady Gulain. This is like where they kill him, purportedly. And I was just seeing if Kroll was at all mentioned again. Yeah, here he is. One more time. Okay, so now he is on the boat. This is like one of his last days alive. He says, close to midnight, Maxwell made the last of several calls he had placed during that Saturday evening. It was to the New York lawyer Jules Kroll, or no, it was to the New York lawyer Jules Kroll had appointed to act as the conduit between himself and Maxwell, because Jules Kroll wasn't going to be in direct contact with Maxwell. He hired a lawyer and wanted the lawyer to be the go-between. The detective later remembered he was told by the attorney that Maxwell planned to fly to New York in the coming week to sit down and plan a strategy. He wanted to move things up a gear. That was fine by me. So yeah, it seems like Jules Kroll kind of plays a role in telling the story of what happened to Robert Maxwell, which is strange. It's like he's kind of at the center of this major story. When Robert Maxwell dies, it's like, it would be like Elon Musk being found floating in the water, like by his yacht in like off the Canary Islands. That's the equivalent. Back in 1991. And this guy, Jules Kroll, is like one of the last people to speak to him, or his lawyer that he had hired to be the go-between was one of the last people to speak to him. So just wanted to point that out. We only have a few minutes left, so I want to get now to the World Trade Center. Okay, so I think one of the most concise places that they have this Summarized is actually on Wikipedia. And I believe this is the Kroll. Yeah, this is the Kroll Inc. Wikipedia page. So the World Trade Center and Sears Tower security. I have some of the people that we're going to look at here. The two guys. Kroll were responsible, and when they say were, they're talking about Kroll Inc. were responsible for revamping security at the World Trade Center after the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. They also took on responsibility for security at Chicago's Sears Towers following the September 11th, 2001 attacks. Just prior to the September 11 attacks, Kroll Incorporated, under the guidance of Jerome Hauer, the managing director of their crisis and consulting management group, hired former FBI special investigator John P. O'Neill, who specialized in the Al-Qaeda network held responsible for the 1993 bombing, to head the security at the WTC complex. O'Neill died in the attacks. So then it goes on to talk about, excuse me, 1 minute. Okay, so the capital, let's see. Yeah, then it goes into like Boris Yeltsin hiring him to go after the KGB guys. Real quick, I can just show you right here. Social media. Kroll's business and investigation practices provided background checks on Instagram influencers using publicly accessible online information to prevent them being canceled for problematic or potentially disreputable behavior. I think that's actually a misrepresentation of what they were doing. I think they were doing the opposite. Yeah, and then it says right here, private intelligence. Kroll has been compared to a private intelligence agency, CIA of Wall Street, for its activities. The well-connected company founder, Jules Kroll, has hired numerous former CIA, FBI, Mossad, and MI5 employees. According to French intelligence, Kroll has been used as a CIA front organization for intelligence activities. And here is the Washington Post article, ironically, which is a CIA cutout. And here it is. The French, the CIA, and the man who sued too much. And there's Kroll right there. And this article is from 1996. And it looks like it is about Le Monde. Yeah, so this is about French officials. French suspicion that Lee and Kroll were corporate spies cannot be understood without some background. Okay, so then they're basically accusing Kroll of being a spy. The French intelligence is accusing Kroll of being a spy working for basically Five Eyes, which includes, as Bibi Netanyahu said a few weeks ago, that includes Mossad. So anyway, yeah, let's back up and let's look at. So here's like the 9/11 tribute picture, left to right. There's Jules Kroll on the left, right? He's the chair of the John Jay College Foundation Board of Trustees, which is what this picture is. But let's go look at these two guys that they name. One of them is Jerome Hauer, otherwise known as, I think, Jerry Hauer. Hauer is his name. And he was an American businessman who was the chief executive officer of a consulting firm, the Hauer Group, LLC. He also held several governmental positions related to emergency management in the states of New York and Indiana. Hauer also worked as a member of the Hollis Eden Pharmaceuticals Board of Directors. Hauer served as New York State's Commissioner of Homeland Security and Emergency Services from October 2011 until December 2014. He was born in New York City. On September 11, 2001, Jerome Hauer was a national security advisor with the Department of Health and Human Services and a managing director with Kroll Associates. He died of prostate cancer August 11, 2023. And then it says right here, Hauer was the first director of Mayor Giuliani's Office of Emergency Management when Giuliani shifted responsibility for the city's emergency preparedness from the police department to the new agency. In his OEM role, Giuliani made the decision to open a crisis center at World Trade Center 7. The center was destroyed when the 47-story tower collapsed at about 5:25 p.m. on 9/11. He left the role in 2000. So he held that role from February 1996 until February 2000. And when he left that role in February 2000, he went to work for Kroll Associates, and Kroll Associates in 1993 was tasked with beefing up the security of of the entire World Trade Center complex in the wake of the World Trade Center bombing, like the basement bombing. So do you understand the conflict there? It's like this guy was working for Giuliani out of World Trade Center 7 for 4 years. He leaves the role, a year and a half, a little over a year and a half before 9/11 to go work for the consulting firm that is responsible for the security of that building. He was already in charge of security for like emergency preparedness. So he would have direct knowledge of what a crisis response team would look like. What would a crisis management response situation look like? He would know that. And then he goes to work for Kroll Associates. Yeah. And they're totally not expecting this to happen. Yeah. This is a question. I need to bring Brad in here for Brad to kind of speak to this a little more. And maybe we'll do that. Maybe we'll get Brad back on here to talk about this guy. The other guy they mentioned was, let me see. Is this guy connected? No, this guy's not connected. This guy, John P. O'Neill. And as far as I can tell, and I'm sure Brad would have this for certain. As far as I can tell, this guy actually seems like he is an earnest, hero. He seems like he's actually trying to solve the crime. Like he's one of the people who are actually trying to figure it out. And he ends up getting killed in when the tower collapses. It says John Patrick O'Neill, but he also worked, I believe he worked for Kroll. It's not listed in his bio, but I'm almost positive he did. Hold on one second. Let me clarify this. I'm searching my notes real quick. If he didn't work for Kroll Associates was maybe he was speaking to them because he was investigating the whole situation. I just want to get the exact actuals here, so I'm but while I'm figuring that out. Okay, so here's an article from the 9/11 Memorial Museum. John O'Neill's FBI jacket and passport embody his enduring fight against terrorism. John O'Neill was a leading figure in the FBI's fight against terrorism at home and abroad. In the years leading up to 9/11, he repeatedly sounded the alarm about the rising threat posed by organizations like Al-Qaeda, and his life would ultimately be cut short in that group's plot to attack the World Trade Center. Born in Atlantic City in 1952, O'Neill would go on to fulfill a childhood dream of becoming an FBI agent, ultimately working at the agency for 31 years. He started as a fingerprint clerk and a tour guide in Washington, D.C. before becoming a special agent in the summer of 1976. Over the next 15 years, he worked in such FBI areas as white-collar crime and foreign counterintelligence, eventually rising to the ranks to become a major player in the agency's counterterrorism operations in the 1990s. In 1995, he was appointed chief of the FBI's counterterrorism division in Washington, D.C., and in 1997, he became a special agent in charge of the FBI's national security division in New York. During his time in these roles, O'Neill investigated such cases as the 1996 bombing of the Khobar Towers in Saudi Arabia, the 1998 bombings of American embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, and the 2000 bombing of the USS Kroll in Yemen. I don't know if y'all remember that. I think I was in 7th grade, 6th grade when that happened. I remember the Kroll bombing, and that was a big cover up, right? O'Neill's diplomatic passport, which he used to enter Yemen after the attack, is on view at the 9/11 Memorial and Museum exhibition, revealed the hunt for bin Laden. But it was O'Neill's first terrorism case at the FBI, the February 26, 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center that would influence his work for years to come. On the same day he started work at the FBI's counterterrorism division, he got word that Ramzi Youssef, the leader behind the bombing plot, had been located in Pakistan. O'Neill was essential in coordinating Youssef's arrest in the coming days. O'Neill developed a deep interest in transnational terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda. It was during this time that he sounded the alarm about the growing threat of terrorism. Quote, a lot of these groups now have the capability and the support infrastructure in the United States to attack us here if they choose to do so, O'Neill was quoted as saying in a May 1997 Associated Press story. A month later, he told an audience at the National Strategy Forum in Chicago, I think interesting times lie ahead. Certainly, we as citizens will be challenged. I know the FBI will continue to be challenged in the years to come. Unfortunately, I cannot predict that no Americans will be injured or killed as a result of a terrorist attack. Through his self-education, through his own research, O'Neill would become the FBI's top terrorism expert and its authority on Osama bin Laden. His warnings about the terrorist threat to the U.S. homeland often fell on deaf ears. O'Neill oversaw many sensitive operations during his time in New York, including deterring suspected plots ahead of the 2000 ball drop in Times Square. He was active in the New York Joint Terrorism Task Force and was in attendance when the task force marked its 20th anniversary atop the North Tower at Windows on the World in September 2000. That Windows on the World is where Larry Silverstein would go have breakfast, remember, like every Tuesday morning, except the morning of 9/11, he didn't go have breakfast because my wife, she booked a gynecologist appointment or a dermatologist appointment. Just 2 weeks into his new job, in late August, back up. But after being passed over for promotions and amid internal tensions at the Bureau, so look, this guy's getting passed over for promotions and amid internal tensions at the Bureau, O'Neill retired from the FBI on August 22nd, 2001. The next day, he started a new job. Yes, here it is. Chief of Security at the World Trade Center. That's what it is. He was recruited to the role by New York-based security firm Kroll Associates, which had advised that security at the towers be revamped after the 1993 truck bombing. So, speculation. This guy is asking all the wrong questions. He's raising the flag on things that the FBI doesn't want the flag raised on. He's pointing the finger at Osama bin Laden, saying, "Hey, we need to go." Osama bin Laden. They didn't want Osama bin Laden found, and all of a sudden, he's recruited by Kroll Associates to go run the security at the World Trade Center 1 month before, not even a month, less than a month before 9/11, and he dies on I think it's the 49th floor. He was on the I think he was on the 49th floor, getting people out when it collapsed. In late August, just days before the attack, O'Neill spoke with a friend, ABC producer Chris Isham, about the new World Trade Center security job and the threats posed by terrorists in New York. Isham remembered jokingly telling O'Neill that at least they're not going to bomb it again, in which O'Neill replied, they'll probably try to finish the job. Just 2 weeks into his new job, O'Neill was in his office on the 34th floor of the South Tower when the plane struck the North Tower. O'Neill evacuated and spoke with his adult son by cell phone, assuring him he was okay and assessing the situation. Around this time, he was spotted around the towers by multiple people, including by filmmaker Jules Naudet, who captured O'Neill in the lobby of the North Tower before its collapse. He was also seen by longtime friend and fellow FBI agent Wesley Wong, who last saw O'Neill heading towards the South Tower, likely to assist the building's evacuation and gather surveillance footage from the tower's security offices. O'Neill's remains were recovered from the wreckage near Liberty Street on September 21st. He was 49. And then, so here's his windbreaker. So anyway, yeah, it's like, seems like this guy was, they made sure this guy was in the wrong place at the wrong time, because maybe he was asking all the wrong questions, and they refused to promote him in the FBI, despite, I guess it sounds like he was doing good work. So anyway, yeah, Jules Kroll, NewsGuard, Robert Maxwell, Saddam Hussein, going after Saddam Hussein stuff, worked for the Russians, going after the KGB, but doesn't like Putin, right? Doesn't like Trump, obviously. And one of the last people to speak to Robert Maxwell alive, and ran the security, or was the consultant for the security on the World Trade Center, and happened to hire John O'Neill, who was the one guy at the FBI who seemed actually earnest in going after Osama bin Laden and figuring out what the hell was going on with Al-Qaeda. And Jules Kroll's company made sure that guy was in the tower on September 11th. So anyway, Jules Kroll is going to probably pop up a little more as we continue to talk about the Book of Trump and the stories here. But I thought this was a good use of our time tonight. I didn't want to cancel the show, especially this week. I feel like 24th anniversary of the World Trade Center of 9/11. We could put something together. So appreciate y'all being here. Let's see if we got any rants. Hit the thumbs up if you wouldn't mind, guys. Appreciate y'all being here. Any questions or comments, suggestions for upcoming episodes? I mean, I have a list of things that we need to get done. We have a lot to get done on the show. Next week, Adam Riva. Adam Riva is who made the Badlands documentaries that John's put out. Fantastic filmmaker, great guy. He's come to GART. I've had a chance to hang out with him. He's gonna be on this show next week because he recently released a new documentary about Bibi Netanyahu. I will post the link to that documentary in the comments after the show's over. But he will be on next week. So we're going to talk about Bibi Netanyahu again with Adam Riva. And then the following week, we're going to have Adrian from Rise Attire. He has put out a documentary about Balenciaga. So we'll have Adrian on to talk about Balenciaga and the fashion industry. It's timely because Armani, like the Armani, just died, like 92 years old last week. So anyway, there's a lot to talk about. And then, of course, we have the Saudi purge coming up, and I got to get Zach and Nick No scheduled. It's hard to do. That one's probably going to have to be pre-recorded because we do the show on the same night that Zach does. Zach has his 5 o'clock show, and then he has Baseless Conspiracies. So to prevent Zach from being on for like 7 hours straight, we're probably going to pre-record it. But I don't know. Maybe just Nick and I will do it alone. It just depends. But I'd love to have Zach on because I know Zach has a lot of information that he's researched about that situation. Because for a lot of people who were into Q, the Saudi purge was a really big deal. So anyway, thanks, guys. Before we go, actually, I need to make sure. Well, you know what? I got one more ad read. Look at me trying to get out of here without doing my job. And our last ad read is, of course, soft disclosure. Get ready to ignite a revolution with soft disclosure. This isn't just a product drop. It's a full-on movement that's about to shake things up. This is personal care that doesn't mess around. No compromises, just pure, unapologetic quality. First up, the lotion, supercharged with aloe, goat milk, and our exclusive Badlands oil blend. This isn't your average drugstore goop. It's a barrier-restoring powerhouse. Choose unscented when you want clean and simple, or vanilla citrus when you want to smell like you actually give a damn. Then the deodorant, natural, aluminum-free, and straight-up badass, built to last 2 months of daily use with scents like crisp mint or bold lemon grapefruit. No gimmicks, just protection that actually delivers. And finally, the tallow bar. And no, it's not deodorant. It's a vanilla coffee tallow stick, primal fuel for skin that's been through hell. Rub it where you need serious moisture, elbows, hands, knees, basically anywhere you're tired of feeling like sandpaper or just want baby soft skin. Every bottle, stick, and bar is handcrafted in Colorado by Badlanders who live and breathe truth. Partnering with Willow Wind Farm and Badlands Media, we're putting our money where our morals are. Soft disclosure, make truth your routine. Head to softdisclosure.com, use promo code Badlands for $5 off, and join the fight today. And yes, big shout out to Soft Disclosure. Annie's great. I know John had her on with Daily Herald on Friday. So please go to the website, check out her stuff. She was kind enough to send me some of it, and it's great. So I highly encourage y'all to go get some of the lotion, but also the tallow stick. And with that said, let me just make sure we don't have any boosts. Looks like we might be all right. All right. All right, guys. Thanks again, and we will see y'all next week.
Thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to hit the thumbs up on this video. And a special thank you to all of our advertising partners. Please remember to shift your dollars to support those businesses that support Badlands Media.